The Boys Season 5 Episode 7 is officially here, so let's just get right into it. Because today we're talking The Boys Season 5 Episode 7 breakdown and review. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Alright, getting right into The Boys Season 5 Episode 7. There was a lot about this episode that I really liked. However, unfortunately, there was a lot about this episode that I absolutely hated, mostly because this is the second last episode of not just the season, but the entire series. So that being said, considering some of what we got in this episode, it just absolutely makes me a lot lower on this season. However, I will get to that a little bit later in the video, because as I mentioned, there are some things in this particular episode that I actually really liked. So starting out, the moments of Homelander in the White House were absolutely amazing. Practically any moment of Homelander throughout the series is incredibly enjoyable. He is an incredible actor, and I definitely find every single storyline with him extremely intriguing. Now, that being said, he does get even crazier in this episode, going so far as to not only sit in the president's seat, but to ask Ashley, the other Ashley, to read the president's mind and to gauge how he truly feels about Homelander. And Ashley being Ashley, she absolutely does this, and although the other Ashley tries to object to this, she definitely seals the president's fate by telling Homelander that the president indeed has doubts about Homelander, and not only that, he actually thinks that Homelander is a psychopath. So after hearing this, Homelander very predictably goes up to the president, assures him that everything will be okay and that he is the one true savior, before he does end up killing the president at the very beginning of the episode. And it's after this moment that you know Homelander just absolutely doesn't care anymore. Not only was he trying to make and institute even crazier laws than he had done in the past, he was totally trying to abolish the entire Congress, and as soon as a single thought from the president was something that Homelander didn't like, he just decided to off him. So yeah, we are officially in the end game, which is to be expected considering unfortunately we do only have one episode left. But since we're talking about Ashley and in this moment, in my opinion, I think Ashley is going to survive this series on one condition. If she doesn't openly and directly turn against Homelander, she's going to survive. And the reason I say this, in my opinion, I think Homelander, in some extremely twisted way, actually thinks of Ashley as some sort of stupid little sister figure. And by that, I mean, there are multiple instances throughout this series that Ashley has said things to Homelander that he wouldn't have been okay with. That she's had to tell him things that no one else probably would have survived telling him. However, she's still here. And a big reason she's still here, she has shown that she has blind loyalty for Homelander. And whether that's out of fear or not, it truly does not matter. The thing that matters in this scenario is the fact that she has not openly wavered against Homelander. She's quite literally seen him murder people just out of cold blood with no hesitation and no mercy. And in those moments, he just talks to her like it's totally normal. And after this happens, things continue to proceed. So he knows that he can do these insanely crazy things right in front of Ashley, and a lot of the times she was actually responsible for cleaning up a lot of those messes. So in my opinion, as long as Ashley does not openly turn against Homelander or try to betray him in any way, she's going to survive. However, the key thing to note is she might very well end up trying to betray him, not because she actually wants to, but because of what the other Ashley has been trying to say. Because the other Ashley has made it very clear that she would rather die than continue to serve Homelander like this. That's why she ended up helping Sage to read Soldier Boy's mind. She wants to help even at the cost of herself. However, the Ashley that we have known for this entire series is all about self-preservation. That's why she's been okay with so many incredibly horrible things. Because at the end of the day, she wants to make sure she is alive. That is the most important thing to her. And she goes so far as to justify things by saying people who used to look down on her or old classmates she used to have would never believe where she got to now. And I feel like this is just a coping mechanism for her and the only way that she can actually remain loyal to Homelander, because she can't live this life without seeing any sort of benefit. And to her, being able to be the president after working her way all the way up from where she started, that is a huge accomplishment. So yeah, if she has to turn the other cheek every now and then, she's going to absolutely do it. However, I feel like unfortunately for this Ashley, the other Ashley is going to get to her, and there is probably a 50-50 shot that she turns on Homelander, which 100% will lead to her eventual demise. Now, another thing that I really liked liked about this episode was actually pretty much everything with Sister Sage. A lot of people were hypothesizing after last week's episode and how it concluded that Sister Sage actually accounted for what happened between Soldier Boy and Homelander. That it was actually part of her plan for Homelander to take the V1. That she had some type of notorious endgame in mind. However, in my opinion, that would have undermined a lot of things that happened. Not only that, it would have been a really easy cop-out. One of the hardest things to do in writing, in my opinion, is writing for a character who is supposed to be the smartest in the world. And the reason for that is because, logically, they should objectively never lose. They should be able to see every single outcome. However, if they don't have all the facts, if they don't have all the information available, then you do create a situation and a scenario that it makes sense for the world's smartest person to be wrong. And in my opinion, the boys executed that absolutely perfectly. And I know a lot of people have pointed out that the other Ashley did read Soldier Boy's mind, so Sister Sage should have realized that they created some sort of bond. However, she quite literally did realize that, and that's why she ended up trying to create a rift between them with Stormfront. However, she overestimated herself. And why did she overestimate herself? Because Ashley never found out exactly what started Soldier Boy wavering, what started to create that bond between Soldier Boy and Homelander. She didn't have the information about anything that happened at the V1 facility. She didn't understand the connection that they had made at that point. So it absolutely is reasonable to assume that her not being able to take all that information into account does create a perfect scenario for her to be 100% wrong. And then her having to cope with that was probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire episode, because she 100% just lost all hope. All she's been doing is basically lobotomizing herself and then watching reality TV. It's not till the end that she actually starts to help out again. However, speaking of her helping out again, I will also say one of my critiques when they introduced us to that room that could harm Homelander, I said if the boys never revisit this, if they never try to get this uranium that they have seen can actually do harm to Homelander, it would be incredibly stupid. So I will say I stand corrected, because in this episode we do see them using this. However, it's not in the way that I thought. They're actually trying to replicate Soldier Boy's beam into Kimiko, and in my opinion, I'm not a huge fan of this. I would have rather them try to create some sort of weapon from the uranium. I think that would have been a little bit cooler, and this just seems really convenient for them to be able to do. I mean, this took decades for it to affect Soldier Boy in that way, and now we're just supposed to believe that in a matter of days it affected Kimiko in the exact way that it needed to. And yes, I know that they do have Sister Sage on their side, and she's quite literally the smartest person alive, so that would knock off at least a few decades. However, going from decades to mere days is quite the stretch in my opinion, and if the entire plan boils down to Kimiko now depowering Homelander so Butcher can have a one-on-one with Homelander as both of them are humans, that would be pretty lame in my opinion. It would feel extremely anticlimactic. I think the only part that I would enjoy about that is that for their final battle, someone who has been propped up as a god with godlike abilities would have to fight that battle as a mere mortal, and he would be more afraid than anyone else, being nothing more than just a human. So that would be the only aspect of that I actually would really like. Everything else about it just seems a little bit too convenient in my opinion. Another thing I liked about this episode, they had me feeling bad for the Deep, which I didn't think I would ever actually be saying. He lost the 7, and we saw in the previous episode he lost 1.4 billion of his friends, and not to mention the fact that all of the fish that remain know that he was responsible for that catastrophe, to the point where after Homelander disbands the 7 and the Deep tries to plead with him to keep it around or to keep him around, we see the Deep getting drunk, and while he is there, he is visited by one of his former friends, the Hammerhead Shark, and this Hammerhead literally tells him if he goes anywhere near the water, they're pretty much going to kill him. He no longer has any friends in the sea, and this goes so far that when the Deep then sees someone drowning, everyone looks upon him and says, hey, he's the Lord of the Seven Seas. The Deep can go save him, no problem. And they all start to cheer for him. And as the Deep stands there, everyone starts to wonder, why aren't you going to help? He's going to drown out there. And then the Deep actually decides to just leave, even though we end up seeing that some people had recorded him. So are there going to be any ramifications for this? No, probably not, because the only person in charge now is Homelander. And is he really going to care about this? No, probably not, in my opinion. However, I feel like this is going to set up a scenario in which the Deep does end up going in the water for some reason, and unfortunately is killed by all of his former friends. Either that, or I could see him just living and having this incredibly miserable life, being very depressed. I'm very 50-50 on it. I feel like they've thrown a lot of things at us with the Deep as a character, especially this season, that I just had not seen coming. Specifically, him killing Noir in the way he did, so predicting his eventual demise is definitely not something I am confident in at all. However, if it does happen, I do believe it will be at the hands of either all the sea creatures, or they'll create a scenario in which Starlight does eventually get her revenge on him and takes him out for good. Another moment I liked was when Butcher and Huey were being held captive. They had a little bit of a heart-to-heart, and even after Huey heard all the dark inner thoughts of Butcher and hearing about his past, he still has some care for Butcher. And at the beginning of this season, we did see more of a rift than probably ever between these two characters. However, I feel like with only one episode left, them trying to repair that bond does make a lot of sense. And considering what does eventually happen in the comics, I don't know if they are going to do that in this series. A lot of this series has been very different from the comics. However, if they are trying to set that up in some way, I feel like creating more of a bond would make that moment even more impactful. However, I don't want to spoil what happens in the comics, so I will just end it there. That being said, I do want to get to what happened at the end of this episode, and that is something I have been predicting since practically the start of this season, since trailers were being released for this season. And almost every episode, I have been saying louder and louder that this one specific character will die. They have been giving us specific moments that just lead you to believe this character's fate has been absolutely sealed. And yes, I am talking about the death of Frenchie. He ended up getting killed by Homelander, and although we do get a very touching moment between him and Kimiko as they do say their final goodbyes, I just feel like some of this moment was a little bit convenient. The fact that Homelander just left at the end, why didn't he continue his search? He quite literally had no reason to leave in that moment other than to give Frenchie and Kimiko a moment to say goodbye, which absolutely makes no sense. And considering the fact that Homelander, when he was x-raying, noticed a small portion that he couldn't see through, so the fact that he didn't try to investigate that after doing what he did to Frenchie makes absolutely no sense. I think the only part of this that I actually liked was that Frenchie actually lured him into the area where they had the uranium and managed to turn it on. However, instead of being able to lock him in there and having some type of epic sacrifice that allowed the other two to actually escape, they decided to have a very convenient moment where Homelander just walks away, decides to fly away, so that they can have some type of heartfelt moment between Frenchie and Kimiko to say their final goodbyes. Now, yes, is this a little bit more touching? I guess. However, I feel like the moment would have been way more impactful and way more epic of a character moment if Frenchie just stayed behind, locked himself in that chamber, and Homelander could not get out for a long time, similar to how he couldn't get out at the V1 facility. This would have given Sister Sage and Kimiko the perfect opportunity to escape. It wouldn't have been convenient. It would have made sense. However, they decided to throw sense out the window, and instead they wanted to give us an emotional moment. However, you could argue Kimiko not being able to say goodbye to Frenchie and not being able to see him in his final moments actually could be seen as even more tragic. So in my opinion, I definitely wish they actually went with this. But that being said, that unfortunately is not the end of my rant, because as you will notice, I have not mentioned Soulja Boy once in this episode, even though in every single episode this season I have absolutely praised him and his performance. And although there's nothing wrong with his performance this episode, what happens to the character of Soulja Boy is probably the stupidest thing that this series has done so far, especially this season. Him getting taken out the way he got taken out by Homelander and being put back in that chamber is so stupid. He got taken down so easily. He put up no fight against Homelander. And yes, I know Homelander is significantly stronger than Soulja Boy. However, putting up no fight at all feels really stupid in my opinion. And not to mention the fact that I feel like this undoes everything that has happened between these two characters this season. I feel like everything that happened at the V1 facility could have given us a lot of moments for growth for these two characters. It could have led to a lot of interesting storylines. Instead, they're really trying to hammer home that the only reason Soulja Boy helped Homelander was because of Stormfront, because of the love Soulja Boy had for Stormfront. And in my opinion, I feel like this is just really lazy writing. I feel like the entire season 3, he stated multiple times that he was so in love with Crimson Countess that she was the one he was thinking about when he was being tortured. And the only real mention of Stormfront was when they went to Herogasm, and it was simply a throwaway line saying she was a real firecracker or something like that. So now to have him totally head over heels feels for her is absolutely stupid, and I feel like it is just a way to promote the Soldier Boy series, which again, I do understand. And some of the moments I disagree with people, and I don't think it's taken away from season 5. However, this, in my opinion, absolutely takes away from it. Making the entire reason Soldier Boy did not betray Homelander was because of the love for Stormfront just feels like such a way for us to be intrigued to see why he's so in love with Stormfront, to see what happened with their relationship. It just makes season 5 feel really lame and feel like a soft pilot for the Soldier Boy series. And as someone who has Soldier Boy as one of their favorite characters in this series, I'm really excited for his prequel series. I was really enjoying his moments in this season. However, considering how everything went at the end of last episode and now in this episode, it makes a lot of his moments in this season feel really anticlimactic and quite frankly pointless. And in my opinion, the measure of a really good show isn't how much you enjoy it the first time, it's also how enjoyable it is upon rewatch. And in my opinion, I feel like this definitely affects rewatches in a very negative way. When we see these moments between Homelander and Soldier Boy, we're going to know that the only reason they're happening is because he's so in love with Stormfront. And to me, that just feels really lazy, feels really stupid. So I wasn't a fan of it at all. The last thing isn't something I hated about the episode, it's just something I found absolutely hilarious. The entire fight sequence that involved She-Line with Starlight and MM was so utterly ridiculous, and the one moment actually made me burst out into laughter, and that's when She-Line actually got water splashed on her, and she did that little jump that if any of you have ever watched Power Rangers, it should have looked familiar to you, because anytime a big explosion happened behind the Power Rangers, they did this incredibly silly jump, and this was all I could think about during this fight. Even after the moment had passed, all I could do was think about how this looks like it was taken straight from Power Rangers. And that's just absolutely absurd. Again, I'm not saying it's something I hated, it actually made me laugh quite a bit. And I don't know if the writers decided to put that in to make you laugh. I know this character has been shown to be pretty ridiculous. So if that was just some type of Power Rangers silly jump moment to show she took damage, I feel like that actually makes it a little bit funnier. So that's why I'm kind of torn, and I don't necessarily hate this moment, but I don't love it either. All in all, I just feel like it was absolutely hilarious. But that being said, that is essentially all we have for this episode. It feels like this season doesn't really know what it's doing. I feel like we are going into the last episode of the entire series, and we still really have no idea how it's going to wrap up. It feels like things just sort of happen very quickly, and they spend a lot of the plot on things that are either irrelevant or it's been a setup for the Soldier Boy series. So although I'm really intrigued to see how they wrap up this series, I am definitely also worried about it as well. I don't want it to feel rushed, and I definitely want certain characters to get the endings that in my opinion they not only deserve, but would serve the story best. But I'm interested to hear from all of you. What did you think of the episode? What did you think of Frenchie's death? And who do you think is going to die in the finale? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.